Hello. So in this video we're going to talk about Vladimir Voinovich's novel The Fur Hat. Now, this is a great late Soviet era satire. The basic premise is that a writer named Yefim Semyonovich Raklin finds out that the Writers' Union is going to be issuing all of the writers with hats, fur hats, based on the prominence of their standing within the Writers' Union. And when he finds out, I'll redo this section. He goes and fills out his application to get a fur hat, thinking that he's likely to get rabbit, which is pretty low down the totem pole. It says, Yefim picked up the application, got to his feet, slapped his pockets, took out his glasses, fastened them on, and read, "Accept an order. Fur hat, domestic tomcat, medium fluffy." Domestic tomcat, Yefim said uncertainly. What is that? You've never seen a cat? It was the director's turn to be surprised. Well, of course, a cat. I've seen cats in general. My neighbor had a cat that recently disappeared. Making hats out of cats. I didn't know they did that, to tell the truth. Excuse me, I'm not well informed. Is cat fur considered better quality than rabbit, or worse? Worse, I would think, the director said indifferently. Rabbits have to be raised, but cats breed by themselves. Then he stared into space, waiting for his visitor to leave. So, Yefim, who has been a member of the Writers' Union for 18 years, has written 11 books, was in the army, has been decorated by the government, and I have that list of credentials memorized because we get it several times in the novel. Yefim begins this basically quixotic quest to get a better type of hat than domestic tomcat medium fluffy. So he spends the rest of the novel, basically the entire second half of the novel, trying to appeal the hat that he's been assigned and to get a better hat assigned to him. And all sorts of craziness ensues. Like, at one point he actually bites the finger of his sort of immediate supervisor, bites it down to the bone, and he then becomes this like international celebrity as all of these Western media stations in Germany, West Germany, the UK, Radio Free Europe, and stuff like this pick up the story and start like imagining that he's this great sort of Soviet dissident hero fighting for freedom and all this stuff. Little realizing that he's primarily just concerned about getting a hat. But what, and so it becomes like, it becomes this weird sort of tale in which he's pursuing his goal and the Soviet state is either indifferent to or prepared to sort of repress him based on whatever the need of the moment is. But one of the things that's striking about it is that this quest is in a way in line with who Yefim is, or who he imagines himself to be. Is the opening section of the book, the opening few paragraphs, says, whenever Yefim Semyonovich Raklin was asked what his next book would be about, he lowered his eyes, smiled, and replied, "I always write about decent people." And his whole manner suggested that he wrote about decent people because he himself was decent and saw only the good in life, and that bad did not exist for him. His heroes were members of the fearless professions: geologists, mountain climbers, cave explorers, volcanologists, polar research workers, men who struggle against the elements, that is, against a force free of ideology. This allowed Yefim to tell stories in which regional, district, and party committees were little involved, a point of great pride with him, and at the same time to get his books out as fast as he wrote them, approximately one book per year, without any trouble from the censors or editors. Many books went on to become plays, film scripts, and radio and television shows. This had a very positive effect on the author's standard of living. So we've got that element, and it's clear from this slightly later section just how much Yefim identifies with these characters. As we get this portion where it says, Yefim assured me that his characters, upright, handsome, one better than the next, were true to life. I was skeptical. In my opinion, people everywhere are alike. Even on an iceberg, a Soviet collective will have its careerists and its stool pigeons, and at least one KGB agent. And then, under conditions of isolation and prolonged separation from their homeland, even people of great courage may finally weaken and exchange jokes of dubious political content. And if their iceberg comes to drift to some western shore, they might not return at all. When I expressed this thought to Yefim, he told me hotly that I was wrong. Under extreme conditions, decent people rose to the challenge. And this, of course, is the setup for the entire book. Yefim rises to the challenge of not getting a decent hat assigned to him by the Writers' Union. Now, the question is, what do we make of that challenge? And I think there are a couple of major ways to look at this. One is that it is satirical in the sense that the characters that Yefim writes about as rising to the challenge are doing these like great things and these heroic sacrifices for the good of the state. Like they are willing to stay on a mountainside and lose their leg, which has been broken, because the state needs this seam of minerals, and so we need to make sure that we can secure it. It's like this kind of stuff, this like action hero heroics. He writes in a style, as near as we can tell, he writes in a style that we would call socialist realism, which is generally realistic in the sense that there's no like supernatural elements, there's no whatever, there's no like avant-garde experimental styles. We're not talking someone like Samuel Beckett here. We're not talking the high modernists, Virginia Woolf, James Joyce, people like this. It's a very straightforward style, but it's focused on depicting positive representations of workers, of peasants or farmers, of soldiers. So it has a propagandistic quality to it, and this was very, very common in the Soviet Union. It's very common in, say, North Korea today, and so on and so on. That seems to be the kinds of things that Yefim writes. And so we can see his story, his struggle to get a better quality hat as a kind of mockery of the ideals of socialist realism, which Yefim himself writes and ascribes to. We can see this as a parody of that type of standing up to the challenge, because it's just a hat and it doesn't really matter. And actually Yefim had a wolf fur hat, which was much nicer than the one that he would have that he would have gotten. Much nicer than the rabbit fur hat that he was likely to get from the Writers' Union anyway. So on the one hand, it's a kind of a pointless, vanity-driven quest. But at the same time, there's another argument to be made, which is in a way actually a sort of paradoxically patriotic Soviet position, which is that Yefim believes in the promise of equality inherent in the Soviet system, and he demands that that equality be honored. He demands that the meritocracy promised by the Soviet system be honored, and that his contributions of 11 books, 18 years in the Writers' Union, military veteran, decorated by the government, etc., etc., that those things be honored appropriately. There's an element of demanding human dignity to the story that we could see as admirable, despite the sort of ridiculous premise of I want a better hat than domestic tomcat medium fluffy. And the other element to that, the other really important element to that, is that Yefim is a Jew. And this is discussed throughout the novel. His daughter has gone to Israel. His one, I think, downstairs neighbor is very anti-Semitic. He's very, like, conspiracy theory, Jews are taking over everything kind of bullshit. And the fact that so the Jews in the Soviet Union always occupied a slightly tenuous position. Officially, there was no discrimination. Officially, there was no anti-Semitic policies. There was no anything like that. No oppression of the Jews whatsoever. But at the same time, officially, there was always a degree of skepticism of the Jews because, and this is the tradition, one of the traditional strands of European anti-Semitism, it was always a question of Jewish loyalty to the state, and whether or not Jews had a loyalty elsewhere. This particularly becomes the case after 1947, 1948, when the State of Israel is founded and really sort of becomes a proper nation state, welcoming Jews from across the world. So that element is there as well. And especially the fact that Yefim's daughter has gone to Israel raises that as a concern. And so in that sense, there's a challenge to the remaining anti-Semitism of the Soviet Union. So, what's the upshot of all this? Of Yefim's quest for equality and meritocracy and the promise of the Soviet Union? Well, he gets his hat in the end, not because of meritocracy or the fairness of the communist system, but because of the corruption of the Soviet system. So his wife, Kukusha, is having an affair, an extended affair with a general, and she tells him, after Yefim gets severely beaten at a hearing about him biting his supervisor's finger, she tells him the story. And the marshal, the general, field marshal, says, "And who is Lukin?" The marshal asked sternly. "The KGB general, maybe?" Ivan Fedosievich wondered. "You know him?" "Yes, comrade marshal, if he's the one, I know him very well indeed." He came to me once, asked me to exempt his grandson from the draft. The boy's a photographer, athlete, mountain climber, and Komsomol leader. I see, the marshal said. And you exempted him? Yes, Comrade Marshal, I did, but that error can be rectified. The marshal said to Kukushka, nodding in Ivan Fedosiovich's direction, "Shrewd fellow, what an aid I lost." Excellent. Ivan, send the little bastard a draft notice, would you? And when Grandpa comes running, tell him we'll ship the kid to Afghanistan. And if he doesn't personally take the hat to the hospital, tell him that Marshal Pabratimov will eat him for breakfast. So, because Yefim's wife happens to be having an affair with a field marshal who can have his ultimate supervisor's grandson sent to fight in Afghanistan, Yefim gets his hat. Now, the other thing I do want to talk about very quickly in this, there is a passage here when Yefim has gone to his supervisor, the one that he bites, whose name is Karetnikov, by the way. When Yefim has gone to Karetnikov to ask for his hat, Karetnikov is having none of it. Initially, he's very genial, very hospitable, but then once Yefim asks for a hat, he basically just loses his mind. And one of the things that he says here is actually really interesting. It says, "You think if you don't write against the Soviet regime, we'll say thank you? You're wrong. It's not enough not to be against us. You have to be for us. When you struggle for peace in your writing, as I do, and include secretaries of regional and district committees, then you'll get everything. We'll forgive you for being a Jew. We'll give you a dacha. We'll give you a hat, reindeer fawn, or muskrat at least. But to anyone who turns up his nose, to anyone who dodges and makes excuses, I say this." And he gave Yefim the finger. That is the finger that Yefim bites. But the argument that Karetnikov makes here is a really important one for understanding the nature of artistic production and even life in more so the Stalinist era of the Soviet Union than by the late 1980s, but it always, to a certain degree, remains, which is that it's not sufficient simply to not be an opponent of the regime. In order to prosper, sometimes even in order to survive, although sometimes this didn't make a difference anyway, you need to be an active supporter of the regime. So at the beginning of the novel, when it says, this allowed Yefim to tell stories in which regional, district, and party committees were little involved, that refusal to take a political stand is one of the things that sort of dooms him, ironically enough. Because one of the major reasons why he's given the lowest quality of hat is because his writing is regarded as being without literary merit.